I don't think it's any secret at this point that I love horror games. Survival horror, especially. Pretty much my entire fucking channel is based on horror games at this point, and now since the month of spoopy nights and pumpkins, I don't really have any way to make my horror-focused channel do something, horror-focused and have it really be special. So I decided to make a video on a game that isn't a horror game, kinda. I wondered about all of the people who don't play horror games because of their aversion to being scared. So I looked at my game collection, and now I want to tell you about Onimusha, a survival horror for the faint of heart. Resident Evil was a smash hit for Capcom. Originally conceived as a sequel to the Japan-only NES game Sweet Home, what became Resident Evil had an allegedly grueling 6 months of initial development, with the man behind the mansion, Shinji Mikami, working primarily alone, doing concept sketches, designing characters, and writing over 40 pages of initial scripts. There were screaming fights on staircases and last-minute changes from a first-person camera to the classic fixed camera system that we know today. When all was said and done, they expected the game to sell maybe around 200,000 copies. It sold over 2.5 million units for the original PlayStation 1, and an additional 2.3 million for its reissued DualShock edition. It is now Capcom's second highest selling franchise.
You were almost a Jill Sam.
Around 1997, only a year after the original Resident Evil came out, Onimusha was originally conceived as a Resident Evil spin-off originally titled Onimusha Demon Warrior, and intended to be released on the successful N64 disc drive, but work was quickly shifted to Sony's PlayStation. Development on that version made it to around the halfway point, but the excitement about the hardware of the upcoming PS2 led the team to abandon what they had made so far and switch all development to the new console. You can actually find footage of that early PS1 build of the game online, and it's astoundingly similar to what was eventually released on the PS2. You can even recognize some of the same areas in the small trailer. It's relatively unusual that you get a game that has such a complicated development history and have it end up so close to the original intention. It's a nice story as far as video game industry goes, where a vision doesn't seem to have been compromised and the development went by seemingly without a hitch, as the game was very close to a launch title, releasing only 3 months after the PS2 launched. Taking place in the Sengoku era of Japan and using actual historical figures such as Oda Nobunaga, who is known through history as being the first great unifier of Japan, as part of its narrative, albeit with some fictional liberties taken. It's a testament to Capcom as a game developer for being able to make Onimusha so similar to the classic Resident Evil games, and yet still have it able to craft its own identity. People often use the phrase, "It's Resident Evil, but with swords." I don't really think that's accurate, because if you play the game like Resident Evil, it's pretty clear from early on that Onimusha seeks out to be a much more action-oriented and less survival-focused when it comes to the survival horror standard of gameplay. The game still uses pre-rendered locations with a fixed camera system being the way that you see the world. Capcom still hasn't lost their touch of beautiful cinematic shots that both manage to add atmosphere and put you right into the action. It's pretty shocking to me how, I don't want to say worse the graphics are compared to the Resident Evil remake that came out only a year after Onimusha did, but it's pretty blatantly video gamey looking. The Resident Evil remake still looks amazing, borderline realistic, and even when looking on it on an old GameCube CRT TV combo. But Onimusha Warlords, despite how visually striking a lot of the camera angles and shots that the game uses, it feels sort of flat overall. I'm not sure if it was due to the power of the PS2 or maybe that the team had to compromise on the graphics slightly due to the development being shelved at the halfway point on the PS1 version. Onimusha uses a much more simple sort of puzzle box design when it comes to its world and level design compared to Resident Evil. There are keys being used throughout the game, but the majority of the locked doors are locked behind a weird, magical, fleshy thing that are unlocked by the 3 separate elements that you get throughout the game. When you first encounter these doors, the doors will have one of the fleshy bits on the door, which means that you just need that specific element on your gauntlet to unlock it. But as you progress through the game, you will find more doors have 2 or 3 of the fleshy bits on it, which means that you need to upgrade the correct element to that specific door, and that will then unlock it. How do you upgrade your elements? Well, at the game's save points, you have the option of enhancing your equipment, using the souls that you get from killing demons throughout the game. You can upgrade your elements, your weapons, but you can also upgrade the herbs into pure medicine, which is substantially better than the normal herb, as well as ammo into stronger ammo types. This door mechanic is somewhat of a replacement to the key system that Resident Evil uses, which helps lean the game into a much more action-oriented focus, since you will always basically be on the lookout for enemies to kill, because the more enemies you kill, the more souls you get, and the more souls you get, you can use to upgrade your elements, which will open doors. This actually leads into one of my main problems with Onimusha, because leaving the option between both the elements and the weapons to level up leaves a lot of situations where you have to farm over and over, killing demons to get their souls if you decide to upgrade a weapon instead of upgrading your element. Having played through the game 2 times at this point, it seems almost pointless to ever upgrade the weapons at all until you have at least maxed out the elements that you come across. If you ask me, it would have made more sense just to have the upgrading the elements also upgrade the weapon it's associated with, because the way that it is right now, it feels like an attempt to just make the game feel longer than it really is. In Resident Evil, when you encounter a section of the map that's locked off or one that is unreachable, it's because you either haven't found something specific or figured out a solution to progress in the game, which, in my opinion, feels more rewarding when you were able to get past that checkpoint. You were able to do something very specific outside of the basic control scheme, so to say, to get further in the game. When it comes down to Onimusha, it doesn't feel nearly as rewarding because for most of the roadblocks in the game, all you did was do what you've been doing for the whole game up to this point, just more of it to get farther. It doesn't necessarily feel rewarding. The only thing that comes from it is upgrading your weapon or element, which only means that killing more demons for souls will hopefully be easier later in the game to unlock a door with 3 fleshy bits on it instead of 2. The weapons that you use throughout the game are swords and bows mainly, but you will occasionally use kunai as a throwing weapon when you play as the ninja Kaede, which means that the conservation of ammo is something that will not come up much, if at all. You can swing the sword by just pressing square and without looking on, but if you lock on you get a small variety of attack options. If you hold forward and attack, then you will do a forward thrusting attack followed by a rising swing that can hit enemies that are above you, which is useful. If you hold back and hit square, you will do a kick that will knock most small enemies on the ground, which will lead into an easy opening to do a plunge attack, which will instant kill any enemy that you manage to hit it with. And if you press triangle, then you will perform a special attack depending on the weapon that you were wielding, and how far you have upgraded that element associated with the weapon determines how strong that attack will be. At the beginning of the game, you will acquire a magical gauntlet which will grant access to 3 versions of Samanosuke's arsenal. There is a lightning elemental katana, a flame-infused broadsword, and a wind-infused double-bladed naginata. Each of these weapons is paired with a specific orb, and both can be upgraded to become more powerful, but when you upgrade the orb, you will also improve the strong single-button attack that is unique to each weapon. You can also find a bow and arrow that you can fuse to become fire arrows, or a musket that you can upgrade to shoot what is essentially shotgun blasts. But this right off the bat means that the player can be much more aggressive towards the enemies in the game compared to Resident Evil. There's no need to worry about running out of ammo, so to speak. The only time that you would ever try to avoid enemies in the game is if your health's getting low, or... The controls in Onimusha use the Resident Evil style tank controls to full effect, even going as far as for the player to have to use the D-pad instead of the analog stick. Unlike Resident Evil, however, you can move while having your weapon ready. You can dodge backwards, strafe side to side, and leap forward slightly towards the enemy that you're locked onto. And now, this next point is a personal problem, 100%. But if there's one thing that I'm good at, it's tank controls. I have never had an issue with the control system and have always found it strange that people have had such a difficult time with it. But for some reason, the strafing in Onimusha, while being locked on, has a tendency to throw off my sense of direction, which often led me to a few deaths. But I don't think it really gets too much in the way of the overall experience. The lock-on, however, is very finicky, and because the game likes to swarm you with quite a few enemies pretty often, it becomes a very common thing to be like, No, why the fuck are you targeting that thing? Please target the big fucking... No, that's the wrong one! No! This issue can bring the combat to sometimes feel pretty frustrating, but I think that the overall gameplay loop is actually pretty enjoyable and simple. It still nails the same sort of feel that survival horror staples in the genre give to the player. Despite its much more action-oriented focus, the game still manages to capture the same sense of urgency and panic, albeit to a lesser extent, during a lot of the game's encounters. Another main issue that I think comes with Onimusha is that because you are essentially forced to combat hordes of demons to farm for their souls over and over and over again, the combat can become feeling very drab after a little while. The game spices it up here and there by giving you long-range weapons, or letting you play as the Ninja Kaede on occasion, but these weapons and these segments are brief at best and don't spice up the gameplay enough to really qualify as breaks in the gameplay loop. When I said previously that there might be another reason that you would want to avoid enemy encounters, it's because at least in my experience, especially early on, you just get sick of fighting respawning hordes of demons. Sometimes you just need to get away to either heal, use an item, or enhance, and you just don't want to keep fighting. So the biggest issue that comes with this is that you just get bored of the main combat loop, which sucks because, as I said previously, I think that in a vacuum it's actually really fun. It's satisfying to use a special attack on a strong enemy and one-shot it. It's fun to flip over the enemy and slit its throat, but it sucks that the game almost forces you to get tired of it. It's fun to upgrade your equipment, but it sucks that you are progress locked because you upgraded your broadsword instead of upgrading the fire element. You know? Even with these faults, however, it feels very clear to me that the developers of Onimusha had a clear vision that I think for the most part was executed as well as they wanted to, or as well as it could have been. I think the best thing about the game is that you can actually play the game in a way that ignores the faults that I've mentioned. And it was intended to be a spin-off in the first place, which makes me feel like the short length was almost deliberate. The variety of locations are just varied enough that you don't get bored, which in a short 3 to 5 hour long game is actually really impressive. A majority of the game takes place in or around the keep, which essentially is the Onimusha equivalent to the Resident Evil mansion. There's the keep itself, an underground location. There are locations outside of the keep on both sides with separate buildings. However, one of these is exclusively for a boss encounter. There's a Tankunobu Flesh Prison, and there's a special realm that is only accessible from a weird little bug man. It all comes together in a package that is almost like a survival horror light. It has all of the key aspects of what a game like Resident Evil or other survival horror legends do, but presented in a way that the average person can play it and enjoy it, and maybe can get someone who wouldn't play a game like Resident Evil or Silent Hill to understand what people like me, or you, or that guy enjoy about survival horror games. This video may lead you to play the game, and maybe get you to play a horror game. If that happens to one person, then my mission has been accomplished. Thanks for watching.
Tomato is a fruit, but it's also a vegetable.